information came direct from Meghan's ex-husband, Trevor Engelson, via an intermediary. And obviously Trevor Engelson is a very successful TV producer. He now has his own family. He's very happy.
The story you're about to hear was never meant to come out. Not because it's fake, not because it's exaggerated, but because it makes people uncomfortable. It cracks open a version of reality that's been carefully wrapped, edited, and protected for years. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. This isn't smooth or polite or easy to digest. It's raw, it's heavy, and it changes the way you look at everything that came after. For a very long time, the public was shown only one version of the truth. Clean edges, neat timelines, a life story that flowed forward without bumps, without gaps, without shadows. But there's always another version, the one that didn't make it past the cutting room floor, the one that was quietly erased. And standing right at the beginning of that erased story is a man who stayed silent long enough for the narrative to be rewritten without him. Trevor Engelson, the man who knew the beginning before it was polished, before it was controlled, before it was turned into a fairy tale. And when someone like that finally steps out of the shadows, it doesn't just add a small detail, it shakes the entire foundation. Because when the past refuses to stay buried, it doesn't whisper, it pushes. And what you're about to hear doesn't just change a footnote in history, it changes everything you thought you understood. Before the royal titles, before the flashing cameras, before the carefully practiced speeches and glossy interviews, Meghan Markle was just a young woman trying to build a life. No palace gates, no global spotlight, no headlines dissecting her every move. And during that time, there was one man who knew her when the story was still messy and unfinished. Trevor wasn't part of royalty, he wasn't part of a fairy tale. He knew her when life wasn't scripted, when mistakes didn't have publicists, when the future was uncertain and unguarded. People like to believe the past disappears when fame arrives. It doesn't, it just gets quieter. According to whispers tied to Trevor's circle, there were things about Meghan's early life that didn't match the version later presented to the world. Not tabloid scandals, not Hollywood drama, something deeper, older, something deliberately removed. A missing chapter so carefully erased that most people never noticed it was gone. But when you start looking closely, the gap becomes impossible to ignore. A blank space in the timeline, a year that disappears without explanation, a period of life that fades into silence. And silence like that doesn't happen by accident. To understand where that silence begins, you have to go back to Las Vegas. Not the loud lights or crowded casinos, but a small wedding chapel just off the strip. The kind of place people walk past without ever noticing. This was the mid-1990s. Meghan was just 18, unknown, invisible to the world. No cameras, no headlines, no one watching. Inside that chapel stood Meghan Markle and a man named Joe Giuliano. No dramatic vows, no white dress for photos, just two young people and two family witnesses. Quiet, private, simple. And then something happened that changed everything. They didn't just promise each other something emotionally, they signed a marriage certificate. Ink on paper, legal, binding, real. No photos were taken, no announcement made. But that doesn't make it less official. That chapel didn't host pretend ceremonies. It processed legal marriages. For a brief moment, Meghan Markle was someone's wife, and then it vanished. Not with a divorce, with something far more final. An annulment. Divorce says something existed and ended. An annulment says the law steps in and declares it never existed at all. In Nevada, annulments move fast, faster than almost anywhere else. If both parties agree, the marriage can be erased in days. And if requested, the entire file can be sealed, not partially hidden, not redacted, sealed, gone. That's exactly what happened. The annulment was filed, the records were sealed, and suddenly, on paper, the marriage never existed. But sealed files aren't meaningless. Courts don't seal records unless there's something inside worth protecting, something sensitive, something not meant for public view. For someone young, unknown, and not yet famous, an annulment like this was the perfect eraser, a legal reset button, a way to walk away without dragging the past behind you. On the outside, it looked like nothing happened, but something did, because paperwork can disappear, time cannot. And after Las Vegas, something strange happens to Meghan's story. It doesn't move forward, it disappears. Officially, the explanation is neat and harmless. A gap year, a break before college, time to travel, time to find herself before starting at Northwestern University. It sounds reasonable, normal, but when you look for proof, it isn't there. No travel records, no exchange program paperwork, no photos abroad, not a single snapshot standing in front of a landmark, no footprints at all. For an entire year, Meghan Markle leaves no trace. According to accounts connected to the Giuliano family, she didn't travel, she stayed put, quietly, away from attention, in Chicago, allegedly living under the Giuliano family's roof, far from Hollywood, far from the life she would later create. This missing year isn't just empty, it's sealed tight, and inside that silence, the story takes a turn that's hard to hear and impossible to ignore. According to whispers from those close to the Giuliano household, Meghan gave birth, not publicly, not under her own name, not with congratulations or announcements, quietly, privately, carefully off the record. A baby girl. Almost immediately, a decision was made. The Giuliano family would raise the child as their own. A new identity, a new place in the family, protected by silence. Meghan would step away, never publicly claiming her. One relative later summed it up in a single sentence that still echoes: She was Meghan's before she was ours. That line carries weight. This wasn't a rumor created by strangers. It was described as a lived chapter, a decision made and then erased. A life that continued, but without her name attached to it. Imagine being told your story has to end so someone else's can stay clean. Imagine being asked to disappear so a future can remain untouched. By late 1995, the arrangement was complete, and then Meghan vanished again. When she reappears, it's like a reset. Northwestern University, theater program, new friends, a life that looks organized, ambitious, full of promise. This is the Meghan the public eventually meets, and at the same time, something else happens quietly and completely. All contact with the Giuliano family stops. No visits, no calls, no slow drifting apart. A full stop. The Las Vegas marriage is never mentioned. The annulment treated like it never existed. The child erased entirely. From that point forward, the story becomes smooth. High school, college, acting, Hollywood, royalty, no gaps, no sealed files, no missing years. Just a polished timeline that moves cleanly forward. But stories built on silence don't stay silent forever. Years later, small cracks begin to show. Numbers that don't line up, dates that wobble. Archived photos from Northwestern show Meghan surrounded by classmates now in their mid-50s. Alumni records suggest timelines that don't quite fit the official birth year of 1981. It happens once, then again, then again. If those alternative dates are closer to the truth, everything changes. Suddenly, the Las Vegas marriage makes sense. The missing year aligns. A birth in 1995 fits without stretching reality. The pieces stop fighting each other. They click. And once you see that, it becomes harder to dismiss the gaps as harmless. Then comes something else. Years later, when her son Archie is born, the birth certificate is quietly amended. Her first and middle names removed. Only her title remains. Officials brush it off as clerical. Insiders admit they've never seen it done before. And that matters. Because if a modern royal birth certificate can be altered, what about older records? High school files, travel logs, court filings from a Las Vegas courthouse decades ago. Records don't need to be destroyed to disappear. They just need to be controlled. If Meghan did give birth in 1995, that child wouldn't be a child now. She'd be nearly 30. And according to quiet recollections in Chicago, there was always someone there. A young girl at Giuliano family gatherings. Never explained, just present. One relative described her simply, "She's part of the bloodline, but nobody talks about her anymore." Recently, whispers surfaced that this same woman has had a child of her own. Quietly, no announcements, no attention, another life beginning in silence. If true, the implication is staggering. It would mean Meghan Markle isn't just a mother, she's already a grandmother. And this is where Trevor Engelson's quiet role matters. He knew Meghan before the reset, before the polish. According to whispers tied to his circle, he confirmed what others only sensed. Parts of her past weren't refined. They were buried. Secrets don't disappear. They wait in sealed court files, in photos that don't match, in memories families stop finishing out loud. And sometimes they return through the one thing no legal document can erase: blood. If a daughter raised in silence ever learns the truth, that moment doesn't just rewrite the past, it challenges the future. Because no title, no palace agreement, and no polished biography can lock a truth away forever. The real question isn't whether this chapter exists. It's what happens when it finally opens. And that's the part people don't like to sit with. Because once you accept that something was hidden, you have to ask why it was hidden so carefully, and who benefited from that silence. This wasn't a teenage mistake that faded with time. This was a decision layered with planning, with legal steps, with distance, with absolute separation. That takes intention. That takes fear of exposure. That takes a deep understanding that if this chapter ever surfaced, it wouldn't just be embarrassing, it would be disruptive. Think about how much effort it takes to keep 1 year invisible. No photos, no records, no casual stories from friends, no slips in interviews. That kind of silence doesn't happen naturally. It has to be maintained. And it has to be maintained over decades. Every retelling of the past has to be rehearsed, every timeline adjusted, every detail smoothed out so nothing snags. And this is where the emotional weight really settles in. Because buried inside all of this isn't just a scandal or a rumor. It's a human cost. Someone who grew up without being acknowledged. Someone whose existence may have been treated like a liability instead of a life. Imagine knowing you belong somewhere but being taught, directly or indirectly, that your presence must remain quiet, that your story can't be told, that your truth complicates someone else's future. People often say silence is peaceful. It isn't. Silence is heavy. Silence presses down. Silence waits. And the longer it waits, the more pressure builds underneath it. That's why these stories don't stay buried forever. They leak through mismatched dates, through whispered memories, through people who eventually grow tired of protecting something that never protected them back. And then there's the irony that can't be ignored. A public narrative built around authenticity, truth, and speaking out. A voice urging the world to listen, to believe, to acknowledge pain. And yet, if this story is true, the most foundational truth of all was locked away and erased before anyone was allowed to hear it. Trevor's silence suddenly looks different in that light. Not weakness, not irrelevance, but restraint. The kind that comes from knowing there are truths so explosive they don't just hurt one person, they collapse entire structures. He watched the story evolve. He watched it simplify. He watched the world accept a version that left entire lives out of frame. And maybe that's why this feels so unsettling. Because if one chapter was erased this cleanly, it forces you to wonder what else was edited, what else was softened, what else was quietly removed so the story could remain palatable. The past has a way of circling back, not loudly at first, just enough to remind you it's still there. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't ask for permission. It demands to be acknowledged.